where the topic is physical intimacy, I guess I could just say, "You're dismissed. Go back upstairs." I guess I could just say that, but with that strobe there, I thought Barry White was going to show up singing, "I Can't Get Enough of Your Love, Baby." Amen. All right. Well, the book of Proverbs, Proverbs chapter number 5, please. Proverbs chapter number 5 today. And let me share with you. Now, before we get started, I want to go back to yesterday's session and touch on something that Brother Michael made mention of on yesterday. He was going through the chemical makeup of the body, and he was talking about, of course, the big two, testosterone and estrogen. One of the chemicals that he made mention of yesterday in your sheet, if you have it, was a chemical called oxytocin. If you see it on your sheet. Let me explain to you how oxytocin works. The oxytocin, God built it into the chemical system of the body, and oxytocin is released along with endorphins in the brain when, to use Brother Michael's words, which are I thought he stated it well, when the apex of intimacy takes place. So in other words, when there's a climax that takes place, male or female, in physical intimacy, the brain releases oxytocin. The body releases, the brain releases the endorphins of what did I say a minute ago? Anyway, I'll think of it in a minute. I'm going through all this forgetting stuff, and I got a bunch of medicine in me right now too, and so pray for me about that. But anyway, oxytocin's released as well. So endorphins are released in the brain. Oxytocin is released. Now, what happens with oxytocin being released is this. God built oxytocin into the body to where that when that apex of the intimacy takes place, it basically emotionally marries you to the object of that pleasure. Okay? That's what happens. It's an emotional attachment to the object of the pleasure. That's why you can take, let's say, some young people, a young lady, she's younger, and she falls for the lies of this older guy, this older teenage guy, and they become involved, and she just, for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, she can't get away from this guy. This guy's sorry as dirt. He won't keep a job. He won't, he just won't take care of her. He won't treat her right. He cheats on her, but she just can't get away. She won't get away. She won't leave him. And the reason is that is the result of the release of oxytocin. What it does is it emotionally marries you to the object of your pleasure. That's why pornography is such a terrible plague in society, because the exact same thing is happening. Men and women are being married to their pleasure. And so the reason that happens, of course, is because of self-pleasure. Well, the bottom line is, out of all of that, you have a whole society that's degenerate, and they don't know how to even engage in physical relations with a human being. And it becomes such a frustration, and that frustration leads to the emotional and social breakdown of the family. Okay, so there's a lot of things that happen in regard to all of that. Now, that being said, I mentioned pornography a minute ago. A lot of people think that that's just a male problem, and it's not it's just a phase in a man's life, and it's just a man deal. But no, truth of the matter is, 1 out of 4 internet inquiries for pornography is from a female. 1 out of 4. So it's a big deal in both sexes. And so today we want to speak about biblical intimacy, biblical physical intimacy, and how that God has outlined it for us in the Scriptures. All right, Proverbs chapter number 5. And I've got I've got enough material, seriously, probably to go 2 hours, and I'm not going to do that here in this session. But I do want to go as far as we can in the next 30 minutes or so. So look at verse 15 down through verse 19. The Bible said, "Drink waters out of thine own cistern, and running waters out of thine own well. Let thy fountains be dispersed abroad, and rivers of waters in the streets. Let them be only thine, and not a stranger's with thee. Let thy fountain be blessed, and rejoice with the wife of thy youth." Verse 19. "Let her be as a loving hind and a pleasant roe. Let her breasts satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished always with her love." And so in this session, I want to deal with being ravished with love. Now, this chapter, Proverbs chapter number 5, is one of several chapters in the book of Proverbs that gives warning regarding what's called the strange woman. You'll find her in verse number 3. The lips of a strange woman drop as an honeycomb. Then you'll find in verse number 20, the verse after the section we read on the home and family, he asks a good question. He said, "Why wilt thou, my son, be ravished with a strange woman and embrace the bosom of a stranger?" So this entire chapter, verse 1 to verse 23, deals with the subject of intimacy and physical relations. It deals with, as well, in these 23 verses, it deals with proper and improper physical relations. Now you'll find in verse number 1 down through verse number 13, there's a young man that's being spoken about here, and as he speaks, he addresses it to his son. Solomon does in chapter 5, verse 1. The son is singular; it's not plural, which means it's indicative of the fact that this is a direct instruction to Rehoboam, his son, who will take the throne. And so he begins to talk about this strange woman. Where her feet lead, what her ways are going to give you in life, and how there's destruction coming. And look at verse 14. This verse seems to absolutely be weird in the middle of the context, because as soon as verse 14 is over with, he starts talking about in verse 15 what a proper home and family life's like. In verse 14 he says this. He said, and let me use these words to preface it. "By the way, son, I, Solomon, was almost in all evil." What evil is he talking about in the context? He's talking about sexual evil. He said, "I, son, I was almost in all evil in the midst of the congregation and assembly." So what Solomon is saying is, he said, "I'm telling you all about this strange woman business." And he said, "Let me tell you how bad it is." He said, "I almost got messed up in this same stuff I'm talking to you about. I almost got messed up at church." He said, "I almost got my life destroyed at church with immorality." Now, most churches I know of have had immorality in them of some form or some kind that has had to be dealt with, or either the people left, and after they left, it came to light as to what was going on. Now, the reason for that is very simple. A church is not just a body of Christ, but it truly is a social organization of a gathering of people. And when people gather together to socialize, where spiritual matters are involved, there is a fine line between spirituality and sensuality. There's a fine line there, because the feelings and the emotions are attached to it. So what you have in a lot of churches is you have couples that meet in church, and so they start fellowshipping together. And they say, "Well, what are y'all doing next Friday night?" "Well, we're going bowling." "Well, y'all go bowl with us." And so they get together. Well, they enjoyed the company so much, they start getting together again, and 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 again. And the next thing you know, the more fellowship they have, the more they let their guard down, and the more they start talking about things that they don't have any business talking about other than with their husband or wife. And so the next thing you know is the freedom of speech becomes banter. It becomes joking back and forth. Well, the next thing you know, one person makes just kind of a suggestive comment, doesn't know whether it'll be taken seriously or not, but it could be, and one latches onto it, or the one marriage is going through a difficult time, and the wife says, she calls this brother and she says, you know my husband well. These are some things I'm dealing with. Could you help me? And the next thing you know, he sure has helped her. And so these are things that I've seen over and over and over and over again. And so God doesn't intend for our marriages to be like that. He doesn't intend for our churches to be like that. But this issue of human sexuality has been probably the single most effective tool that Satan has ever used to affect the church, Old Testament and New. You can go all the way to the book of Genesis and walk all the way through the Revelation, and you'll find improper human sexuality all the way through this Bible, and you'll find how devastating it is. And so God intended for one man and one woman to be involved intimately for life. That's what God's intention is. Now we've had a real breakdown of that in the society that we live in, but that's what God's intention is. Now marriage, of course, is God's idea. And some people call it the institution of marriage, right? And after you're married, as long as I have, you need to be institutionalized. It is an institution that is ordained by God. Now, God made physical relations as a part of the institution of the family, home, and marriage. And it was His idea. He's the one that created it. And God could have created the human intimacy specifically as an act as natural as breathing for the purpose of procreation. He could have created it that way. He didn't. He created physical intimacy the way He created food. Food is not just meant to be, is not just meant for the nourishment of my body. It's also meant for my enjoyment. God gave me the enjoyment of food through the taste buds and the sensation of being hungry and feeling full. And so what God has done is He gives a pleasure in life, in the creation of the way we indulge in food and ingest food. The same way with human sexuality. God created it in such a way as the ultimate is the procreation and advancement of the human race, but at the same time, God created it to be enjoyed, and to be enjoyed often. That's how God created it. And so what you find is that God has the idea of producing this in the human home and family, and so it's not dirty, it's not wrong, it's not ungodly. It's something that has to be viewed from a biblical perspective, knowing what the mind of God was. Now, the word sex, S-E-X, the word sex has a demeaning character to it. It puts a dirty spin or a dirty twist on the act of human intimacy. Did you realize that the word sex was never used as a verb until the 20th century? Never until the 20th century was sex used as a verb. As a matter of fact, I'll read to you the definition in 1828 in Webster's Dictionary, the word sex. It says, the distinction between male and female, or the property or character by which an animal is a male or a female. The male sex is usually characterized by muscular strength. The female sex is characterized by softness, sensibility, and modesty. By way of emphasis, womankind is referred to as the unhappy sex. That's how she is referred to in regard to the way she feels. It was never meant to be a verb to describe activity. It was meant to describe who we are. The novelist, the English novelist D.H. Lawrence, was basically a pornographic erotica novelist of the late 19th century. D.H. Lawrence came into the United States fleeing some stuff in England. He tagged up with Aleister Crowley. I don't know if you know Aleister Crowley's name. Aleister Crowley was, of course, responsible for the publicized satanic movement in the United States of America. And so Aleister Crowley and D.H. Lawrence, according to what I have read and heard, collaborated together to bring this word to light, no longer used as a noun, but to use it in the negative connotation as a verb in regard to the immoral activity of sex. And so when you look at what it has become, God never intended for it to become that. So marriages in America are in serious trouble, and this is a part of the reason why they're in serious trouble. 54% of marriages, first-time marriages, are ending in divorce. 72% of second-time marriages, divorce remarriage situations, are ending in divorce. And a part of the problem in both of the divorce situations is a lack of understanding in the area of physical intimacy. Now, I want to give you some recent statistics, and these are statistics I got this morning, as a matter of fact, and they come fresh from marriage.com. These are the top 10 reasons why individuals are getting divorced. Number 10, working our way to 1. Number 10 is abuse, physical and verbal abuse. Number 9 is they're just not prepared for marriage. They got married, but they weren't ready to be married. Number 8 is a lack of equality. One views themselves as better or greater than the other. Number 7, a lack of intimacy. Not enough intimacy in the home and family. Number 6, unrealistic expectations that are being levied against one or the other of the spouses. Number 5, weight gain. Number 4, constant arguing between spouses. Number 3, lack of communication. Number 2, money. And then number 1, which works its way out of number 7, the lack of intimacy, is infidelity. It used to be that money was the number 1 reason for divorce, followed by infidelity. Now, infidelity is the number 1 reason for divorce, and money is coming in at number 2. And so what does the Word of God have to say? So that's the most important thing. Let's look at what the Word of God has to say. Now, in Proverbs chapter number 5, and look at verse number 15. Between verse 15 and verse number 19, he deals with the subject in an allegorical form of what physical intimacy in a marriage should be like. He said, drink waters. This is an allegory for having relations with your spouse. Drink waters out of your own cistern and running waters out of your own well. Drink waters out of your own cistern, running waters out of your own well. There are 2 things that you see. Number 1, the word drink. As I said, this is allegorical, and so basically it is dealing with permission. God is giving permission. He is saying through the writing of Solomon, it is permitted in the home, it is permitted in the confines of marriage to engage in physical intimacy, and it is not dirty, it is not viewed as sin, it is not viewed as nasty, it is permitted by God. And He said, drink, and drink to your heart's content. Drink your fill. If only a sip will do, then have a sip. If you need a gallon, drink a gallon. He is saying here, I'm giving you permission to engage in physical intimacy in the home. Now notice the persistence of the physical intimacy in the home. Notice he didn't say just waters out of a cistern, which is just a reservoir of water, but he said running waters out of thy well. And running waters out of a well is dealing with an artesian well, a well that begins to spring up and spout out. And so he is saying here in the text that this ought to be a consistent running part of your life. And I know of people who have been married for years and years and years, who they and their spouse have not had any physical intimacy literally in years. No, not a month or two, but in years and years and years. And they are, because of their commitment to not get a divorce when they got married, they're staying together and they're absolutely, totally miserable, and they don't like one another, they hate one another. They're going to stay together for the kids, they're going to stay together for the grandkids, but they're unhappy, and a part of that unhappiness has to do with a lack of communication, understanding, and participation in physical intimacy. And God is giving us an idea here in verse 15 of how persistent this needs to be in our life, regular in our life. Now notice verse number 16, he talks about the places or the setting of it. He said, let thy fountains be dispersed. Let thy fountains be dispersed abroad, and the rivers of water into the streets. Again, this is allegorical language, but what he is saying is you don't have to just confine this to one place. If you read the book of Song of Solomon, I hope I can get there in a little while, but if you read the book of Song of Solomon, one of the things that you'll find about Solomon and the Shunammite is that they have what I call in counseling sessions with married and premarital counseling sessions with people, they're called love nests. These individuals have these two individuals, Solomon and the Shunammite, had different love nests or places they would go, and these places that they would go would specifically be for two things: the fellowship of he and her, and a place for them to go make love and to enjoy one another's bodies together. That was their fullest intention. And so what he is saying here, and Solomon again is doing the writing in this text, in verse 15, he said those fountains, which is an allegory for the physical intimacy of marriage, is to be dispersed abroad in different places. Go to Gatlinburg. Go to a cabin in the mountains. Go wherever you have a special place that you have chosen for the two of you to go, and take some time. Go and enjoy one another's fellowship, company, and bodies. And so the places that are involved. Verse 17, the privacy that is involved. In verse 17, he said, let them, talking about the fountains and the rivers of water, which is allegorical for intimacy, he says, let them be thine own, and not a stranger's with thee. Did you see that? He said, let them be thine own, and not a stranger's with thee. Now, what you find in this society, and it has always been, it will always be, because of Satan's influence in this area, you'll find that there are a lot of people who bring other people into their relationships. I know of a church in this state, on the west end of the state, in the Memphis area, and the pastor, along with several couples in the church, were all active swingers in that church. All of them active swingers in that church. And when it finally came out and the rest of the congregation figured out what was going on, it blew that church sky high. I don't even know if it still exists to this day. But you would be surprised how much of this kind of activity actually goes on and no one ever knows it. There is, being involved with law enforcement back home years ago, there was I would counsel a lot of officers, and one officer was talking to me about how many officers in our department were involved in that type of activity in a club on the edge of Charlotte. And there were lawyers and doctors and just all kinds of high professional people that were involved in all this. Well, that is Satan's prostitution of this great gift. And so the Bible said that it's a private thing. There are, and I say this to our couples when we're counseling them, there are very few things that are off limits in your bedroom. Very few things. Number one, and these are the things that are off limits in your bedroom. Number one, bringing someone else in your bedroom is off limits. It's completely off limits to bring someone else in your bedroom. Sodomy is off limits in your bedroom. The Bible is against sodomy. then pornography is off limits in your bedroom, because what you're doing then is you are actually bringing someone else into your bedroom. And then can I say this? I had a person ask me one time. They said, I don't know about this. They said, now when it comes to the bedroom, is it okay to role play? And this is a couple they had been married for years, and I scratched my head, and I said, no, I don't even know. I want to know what you're talking about. Okay, they told me anyway, and I'm not going to tell you. Okay, but I said, I said if you or your wife wants to dress in something alluring and attractive for you inside that bedroom, or vice versa, I guess. I don't know. If that's what you want to do between the two of you for an attraction, that's your business, okay? I don't want to know, okay? But if you're dressing up to pretend to be somebody else, if you're pretending to be another person, then that's the spirit of adultery. That's an absolute spirit of an adulterer. And you don't want to be doing that. And so anything else that in the privacy of your own bedroom you two can agree upon, that's your business. No one has any business being in there other than the two of you. Now notice this, the privacy of it, the permanency of it. Look at verse 18. The Bible said, let thy fountain be blessed, and rejoice with the wife of thy youth. In other words, the indicativeness of verse 18 is this ought to always be going on. Regardless of the time of life, regardless of the age you are, this is something that the two of you ought to enjoy forever and ever and ever. You ought to rejoice with the wife of your youth and continue to enjoy one another together. Verse 19 deals with two things. It deals with the playfulness of this part of our marriage. He says in verse 19, let her be as the loving hind and as the pleasant roe. Now, being a deer hunter and studying deer hunting for the better part of 40 years, one of the things that I know is that when the white-tailed deer, and I've hunted mule deer, they're the same, hunted elk, they're the same, and when you're dealing with these animals at a particular time in their life when they're going to procreate, they begin to be loving, they begin to play games one with another. She will allure him and make him chase her, knowing that she is eventually going to come to the place and point of yielding to his desires for her. But there is a game that goes on with them. In other words, it is not service. Are you hearing me? A lot of times when I have been counseling with people in regard to marriage, and this issue is a conflict, one or the other views this part of the marriage as service. All right, okay, whatever. So a husband says, man, I'd like to be with you. And she says, all right, whatever, come on. Now, can I say this to you? There's absolutely, at that moment, nothing that man wants to do with you. He don't want anything to do with you. Now, he may go and y'all may fulfill that act of marriage, but it will not be an enjoyment for him and it will not be an enjoyment for her. And the reason for that is very simply this. It is viewed as serving. It's viewed as a service. It's not being viewed as something enjoyable. And that's one of the reasons why men go elsewhere. I can take you the next county down. And I was in jail one night and was talking to one of the guys in jail. We was talking about him being in jail and what all he'd done. And I had some real unusual times with the inmates there. Just them opening up and sharing some things. And this is what he said to me. The next county down where I grew up was very much known for its prostitution. Always has been, always will be. I mean, it's just always known for prostitution. And this is what he'd said to me. He said, "Preacher," he said, "I would rather pay a woman money and go spend time with her than go home and be with my wife." He said, "I'd rather do that any day of the week." Now, the reason he's saying that is this, and I got to talk to him a lot. It was because of what he had to expect when he went home to be with his wife. He could have exactly what he wanted with someone that acted, and it was all an act, acted like they wanted to be there. Whereas when he went home, if he had any kind of relations with his wife, it was acted upon as a duty. And so what you have to understand is God didn't intend for it to be that way. He said, "Be like the loving hind and the pleasant roe." In other words, he said, act as they act. There is a game that goes on between those two. There is a chasing the one of the other. There is a desire, an absolute desire of him for her, and then her for him. And so that's what he's saying in that text. But then he says this is interesting. He said, "Let her breasts satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished always with her love." Now, he didn't have to put that in there. We would have understood what he was talking about without him putting that in there. But he did. Can I say this to you ladies, and I'm not being off color, off key, but I know of very few men that are not attracted to the chest of a woman. I don't know why. Don't ask me why. I have no idea. There are two blobs of fat on the front part of a body, and yet the God's honest truth is it's an attraction to a man. Could I get a witness? I'm just being honest. When you go through the book of Song of Solomon, he constantly, through the book of Song of Solomon, talks about, and so does she, this part of the body and its attraction to the opposite sex. And so the Bible said in verse number 19, "Let her breasts satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished." The word ravished means to be intoxicated. Be intoxicated with that woman's love. One woman, and I don't agree with their stand on a lot of issues as far as doctrinal things are concerned, but one woman and her husband from the state of Tennessee that have written exclusively about this, she talked about how that when she has took this part of her life seriously, gave that part of her life to God to be what her husband needed to be, how it changed her husband toward her. Changed him completely toward her in a very, very loving and a very kind way. So go with me to Song of Solomon 1. Let me show this to you, and I'll be done. Well, how much longer we got, Mike? Are we? Okay. Well, I won't keep you really long, because I know some of you may be uncomfortable with what we're dealing with, but it's needed. It's in the Bible, and it's needed. Now, the book of Song of Solomon was a marriage handbook. It was a Jewish marriage handbook. Now, I want you to listen to what I have to say about this. The Jewish marriage handbook of Song of Solomon was not allowed to be read by men, Jewish men, under the age of 30. Now, if they got married before they were 30, they could read Song of Solomon, but they could not read this book until after 30 because of the graphic nature of it. Now, we as Independent Baptists, we've turned the book into a great typological book of the relationship between Christ and the church. I think that's great, but that's not what the book's about. The book of Song of Solomon is about a marriage between a man and a woman, and what they engaged in as a marriage between a man and a woman. Now notice about 4 or 5 things that are important, okay? Look here with me. In verse 3, notice these little things I'm going to give to you. She says, the savor of thy ointments, thy name is as an ointment poured forth. She was talking about the savor of how he smelled. Look at verse 12 rather. While the king sitteth at his table, my spikenard sendeth forth the smell thereof. A bundle of myrrh is my well-beloved unto me. Verse 14. My beloved is unto me as a cluster of camphor. There are 4 verses, 3, 12, 13, and 14, that deal with the aroma that is put off. In other words, Brother Dodson, he is saying he perfumed himself for her. She perfumed herself for him. Now, a lot of you women and men both, you sniff, that smells good. Put that on. That smells good. A little aftershave. But you don't even really realize what it was originated for. What the aromas were originated for was the allurement and sexual attraction of the opposite sex. What it does is this. The smell triggers pheromones. The pheromones release endorphins. And what it does is that smell of that cologne of that person you're attracted to, you're physically attracted. You see her, you see him, you're physically attracted. You meet, and then that first smell, it does something in here that registers that with that. And so here in chapter number 1, in these 4 verses, it talks about the importance of aroma. Listen to this. The woman in Proverbs that was attracting the younger man, Brother Matthew, the Bible said she said this to him. She said, come, let us take our fill of loves. She said, the goodman of the house has taken a bag of money, he's gone away. She said, you know where I'm going? I have perfumed my bed. She perfumed her bed for the purpose of a night spent together with someone in an illicit way. And if it worked for someone in a negative way, I promise you it'll work for someone in a positive way. All right? Number 2, not only the aroma of the text, notice the appearance in the text. Verse 5. I am black, but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. She is complaining about how she looks. Look at verse 6. Verse 6. Verse 6. Look not upon me, because I am black, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but mine own vineyard have I not kept. Now, in verse 5 and 6, she is really complaining about how she looks. Now, in that day, it was not an attraction to have tanned skin. You know, you got folks running around now, they want to tan themselves up to attract people's attention. In that day, it meant you actually worked. It meant you got in the sun and worked. And a lady was not supposed to be out there doing the keeping of the vineyard. That was left up to someone else. But here she has been made to do this in the sun for a lot of different other people other than just herself. And so she's complaining to him about the way she looks. In verse 11, the Bible said this. The Bible said, if you look at verse number 11, I believe it's verse 11. Let me find my place here. Yeah, look at verse 11. He says, I have compared thee, O my love, to a company of Pharaoh's, a company of horses in Pharaoh's chariots. Thy cheeks are comely with rows of jewels, thy neck with the chains of gold. We will make thee borders of silver and borders of gold with studs of silver. Here's what he's saying. He says, I know you complain about how you're looking. But he said, darling, you don't look bad to me. And he said, I believe you look beautiful. And I'm going to put clothes on you that are going to make you look even more beautiful. And so what he was doing was he was appealing to her pride. She was not proud of how she looked, but he was appealing to her feminine sense, saying, listen, I don't care how you look. I love you. You look beautiful to me. You look gorgeous. And I'll buy you whatever you want. I'll put on you whatever you want to make you look pretty. Whatever you think makes you look pretty, I'll buy it and I'll put it on you. And when you look at Song of Solomon, you'll see two things that man does that keeps her interested in him. He's constantly bragging about her beauty and her body. He's constantly bragging about her beauty and her body. My girl, you look good. You look wonderful. And as he constantly reminds her of her beauty and her body, she's constantly giving him her body. Here's the point. A lot of times the reason women don't respond to men is men are so unsympathetic and they're so apathetic about what they see, they never mention to their wife how beautiful they are, how much they love them, how much they appreciate them. Why would she want to go and be intimate with you when it seems all you want to do is be done? You don't want to talk, you don't want to compliment, nothing. And so appearance is everything. And in appearance, what you have to learn is a lady dresses herself up, you need to compliment that. You're not going to get anywhere with her if you're not complimentary of what she's trying to do for you. Then there's an adoration in the text. How do they adore one another? In verse 4, she says, draw me, we will run after thee. In other words, she is saying, flirt with me. Do something to allure me to you. Flirt with me. All right, look at verse 7. She flirts with him. She says, tell me, O thou whom my soul loveth, where thou feedest, where thou makest thy flock to rest at noon. All right, so here's what she says. She says, hey, tell me something. Where are you going to be at lunch? I know you quit work about lunchtime. Maybe I could come over and, maybe at lunch, see you a little bit. Where are you going to be at lunch? She said, because you better tell me, because I might do this. Look at what she said in verse 7. Why should I be as one that turneth aside to the flocks of thy companions? She said, if you don't tell me, I might just wind up there with somebody else. Verse 8. If thou knowest not, he says, O thou fairest among women, if you don't know where I'm going to be, go thy way forth by the footsteps